It was 2 a.m. when I heard it. Her voice, unmistakable, raw, confessing things I was never supposed to know. But she wasn't talking to me. She was talking to everyone else. I've always had trouble sleeping. Comes with the age, or maybe just the stress that accumulates over the years like unread emails. I've never been the kind of guy to talk about my feelings. I fix things. I handle responsibilities. I show up. That night, I was doing what I usually do when insomnia hits, making a cup of tea, flipping through channels, and scrolling mindlessly. I ended up on a podcast app. One of those curated lists, late-night voices you've never heard, caught my attention. I picked an episode called Leaving Quietly. The voice that came on was soft, measured, slightly nervous, but familiar. Too familiar. I used to think marriage meant safety, but mine became something else. Something suffocating. I froze mid-sip. Her tone, her cadence, even the way she breathed between thoughts, it all hit me in the chest. It sounded like my wife, Elena. I turned up the volume. He's a good man. Steady. Predictable. But I stopped recognizing myself in his life. I became background noise in my own home. And then I met someone who made me feel seen. I stared at the screen, searching for any kind of identifier. No name. No face. Just the title, Anonymous, Episode 14. But I knew. My gut knew. Elena had been more distant lately, sure. But we'd been married nearly 17 years. We had our rhythms, our silences, our separate corners. I thought that was just what long-term love looked like. I listened through the entire episode, 42 minutes long. She never mentioned names. Never gave specific locations. But she talked about our dog, the one who died 2 years ago. She talked about a broken railing on the back porch. She talked about her art studio and how her husband never really came in there. All small things, but they added up to one clear picture. Me. Us. But not as we were. As she painted it, our marriage was a quiet sort of prison. One she walked into willingly and now desperately wanted to leave. And the worst part, she framed herself as a survivor. I'm not the villain. I'm not ungrateful. I just want to breathe. I didn't sleep that night. Not a second. I waited until the episode ended. Then I searched for the podcast itself, Anonymous Hearts. It had 37 episodes, each one featuring a different, anonymous voice. But as I scanned through the show titles, The Second Apartment, Split Holidays, After the Garden Party, I started noticing a pattern. Emotional confessions. Marital truths. Secret lovers. This wasn't just therapy. It was content. Entertainment, wrapped in whispered tragedy. Elena had once mentioned she'd joined a new book club full of interesting women. She said some of them were into podcasting, modern storytelling, and audio memoirs. I hadn't thought anything of it. I'd smiled, nodded, and gone back to work. I didn't bring it up to her the next morning. Instead, I downloaded every episode of the podcast and created a spreadsheet. I cross-referenced details, voice patterns, even subtle background noises. I wasn't trying to be paranoid. I was trying to be sure. Because if I was right, if Elena was behind this anonymous story, then she wasn't just rewriting our marriage. She was preparing the world for a version of events that didn't include me. Over the next few days, I watched her differently. Elena had always been composed, almost effortlessly so. The kind of woman who made lists in beautiful handwriting and kept houseplants alive without trying. She still kissed me good morning. Still made 2 cups of coffee. Still sat beside me on the couch. But now I knew the subtext. Now I noticed the glances at her phone, the soft smiles at texts she never shared. I remembered the art retreats she took alone, the weekends she needed space. The growing silence that used to feel like peace, but now felt more like strategy. I still hadn't confronted her. Instead, I emailed the production company behind Anonymous Hearts, posed as a curious listener, asked who curated the stories, who verified them. I got no real answer, just a polite, vague reply about confidentiality and respecting the voices of women who need safe spaces. I wasn't angry yet. I was stunned, like I'd been walking through fog and suddenly found a cliff beneath my feet. The next episode dropped the following Thursday night. Same voice, same woman. I've started to imagine what life would be like if I actually left. I don't hate him, but I don't want to die in the same room where I stopped dreaming. There it was. The preparation, the rationalization, the framing. She was building a parachute and painting me as the crash. I finally reached out to a friend of mine, Jason, who works in digital media. Told him I thought my wife was secretly podcasting about our life and that she was planning to leave, with the world already on her side. He didn't laugh. He just said, "You better get ahead of the narrative. Fast." And that's when I decided. If Elena wanted to tell her version to the world, then I would tell mine. But not with bitterness. With truth. With proof. With a calm voice that didn't need theatrics or metaphors. Just facts. Dates. Emails. Receipts. If she was preparing to leave, I would be ready. And when she stepped into the spotlight, she would not be the only one speaking. The following week, I lived in what I can only describe as controlled silence. Elena had no idea what I knew. She moved through the house like normal, humming when she cooked, texting while folding laundry, calling her sister in the evenings to talk about recipes and garden updates. And yet, I couldn't hear any of it without feeling like it was all part of an act. I listened more carefully now. I started keeping a quiet journal of everything I noticed. I noted her routine, when she left the house, when she came back, who she talked to on speaker, what times she would go on long walks, and when she would mention the podcast club. That's what she called it, the podcast club. I realized then she had never let me meet the women in that club. Not once. I also realized I had never asked. I had let her have her own world, and now I was realizing that world might have never included me in the way I thought. I went back to the podcast app and played earlier episodes. I started recognizing subtle details hidden in metaphors. She never gave names, but the woman talked about her husband having good hands for fixing things, but no idea how to hold a heart. She described a man who bought her flowers only after she'd cried. A man who never knew how much she pretended to sleep to avoid talking. I had bought Elena flowers 3 weeks ago, after what I thought was a minor argument. Now it felt rehearsed, like she knew I would. It chilled me. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I sat at the kitchen table at 1 a.m., staring at my wedding ring. It felt heavier than ever. 2 days later, I set up a meeting with an attorney. I wanted to understand my rights. I wasn't filing for divorce, not yet. I wanted to prepare. I explained the situation in broad strokes. The lawyer was younger than me, maybe late 30s, but sharp. She leaned forward, listened, asked the right questions. "Do you have evidence linking her to this podcast?" I nodded. "Enough," I said, "but I need more." She told me to keep documenting. "The court doesn't care about betrayal," she said. "It cares about proof." That same day, I set up a new podcast account under a pseudonym. I began recording short daily entries, my own version of events. Not emotional rants, just calm, structured summaries. I spoke about our marriage, our early years, our quiet disconnect, and the changes I noticed. I didn't mention her by name. I didn't attack. I just told my truth. I didn't even post them yet. I just saved the drafts, because I had a feeling the moment to use them would come. Meanwhile, Elena kept releasing episodes. Every Thursday, her voice grew bolder. She spoke about light at the end of a long emotional tunnel. She described someone who sees her for who she is now, not who she used to be. I didn't know if she was seeing someone else. She never said it directly. But there was a warmth in her tone when she said things like, "I finally feel like myself again." And that wasn't about me. I had become a placeholder in my own marriage. Then came the moment I was waiting for. Episode 41. The most recent. In it, she said, "I've made the decision. It's time to start over, fully." She ended the episode with, "Next time I speak to you, I won't be anonymous anymore." My heart dropped. This wasn't just a side project. She was going public. She was going to out herself as the voice behind the entire podcast. And I knew what would happen next. She'd frame me as the man she had to escape. The gray backdrop to her story of rebirth. The forgettable husband in her great escape narrative. I went into the garage, pulled out the old safe we kept in the back, and locked away every document I had. Financial records, screenshots, text backups, calendar entries, receipts from joint payments. All the pieces she had excluded from her version of our life. I didn't say anything to her. I just waited. The following Tuesday, Elena got a call. I watched her face light up in the hallway as she answered. She walked outside with the phone, voice excited but hushed. When she came back in, she said, "You won't believe it. The podcast might be getting picked up by a storytelling platform. Like, real money." I acted surprised. I congratulated her. "That's great," I said. "You've worked hard." She kissed me on the cheek and went upstairs. That night, I published the first episode of my own podcast. Under a pen name. A single episode. Titled, When fiction isn't fiction, living in someone else's story. I didn't name her. I didn't reference the podcast directly, but I told my story, my version. And I ended it with this. Sometimes, the loudest voices aren't the most honest. They're just the first ones to speak. By morning, the episode had gone modestly viral on a few storytelling forums. Enough that people started connecting dots. A few listeners posted questions under her podcast page. Is this the same couple from that new expose? Her next episode was delayed, then pulled. Comments were turned off. A few articles surfaced within a week, speculating about the ethics of anonymous storytelling and the blurred lines of nonfiction memoirs. Someone leaked an early sponsorship pitch she'd made to a production company. In it, she described her husband as emotionally absent and quietly cruel. That's when I knew she had planned this all along. And that's when I decided I wouldn't let her do it quietly. Elena started unraveling slowly. At first, she didn't say anything about the podcast. She'd go silent during dinner, scrolling on her phone longer than usual. Once or twice, I caught her glancing at me with something between suspicion and guilt. Then came the questions. Have you heard anything weird online lately? She asked one morning, pouring coffee, eyes fixed on the mug. Like, people gossiping about us? I shrugged. Why would anyone gossip about us? I asked calmly, taking a sip. She didn't push it. But I knew that question wasn't random. Somewhere out there, a thread had been pulled, and she was starting to feel the fabric give way. Within a week, her podcast vanished from Spotify and Apple. All episodes gone. No warning. No explanation. Just a blank page where her voice used to live. When I asked casually about it, she said the hosting service had taken things down temporarily for maintenance. I didn't argue. But 2 days later, I saw a post on a forum she frequented. Looks like Elena's show got flagged for content issues. Someone claiming it's all stolen, or fake, or both. That post had over 300 comments. Some were defending her. Others weren't so kind. One person even shared audio clips comparing her podcast with mine. It was spreading faster than I expected. Around this time, a former sponsor, some startup that sold wellness supplements, posted an official statement cutting ties. They cited concerns about transparency and authenticity. A second followed. Then a third. Elena spent hours on the phone. I could hear her pacing upstairs, sometimes whispering, sometimes raising her voice. Once, she threw something in the bathroom, a brush, maybe. Then came the day she didn't come home until nearly midnight. She walked in exhausted, cheeks streaked with dried tears. Just a long day, she mumbled when I asked. I'm fine. But her eyes said otherwise. What she didn't know was that I had started receiving messages, too. Anonymous ones. Listeners. Some who'd followed her story religiously and felt betrayed. Some who were piecing together timelines. One message stood out. She made you a ghost in her life so she could be a hero in someone else's. It stuck with me. Because that's exactly what she did. I had never been abusive. Never neglectful. We had problems like any couple, sure. But I had supported her through unemployment, through 2 years of failed side businesses, through her father's passing. And in the end, I wasn't just erased, I was rewritten. At the end of the 3rd week, she finally brought it up. Did you make that podcast? She asked one night, her voice tight. The one that's been circulating? I didn't deny it. I did, I said. Everything in it is true. She froze. So you're trying to ruin me? No, I said. I'm telling my side of the story. The one you decided didn't matter. She didn't respond. She just walked upstairs. That night, she slept in the guest room. The next morning, I got a call. A journalist. Not a major one, but someone who ran a respected blog about media ethics and modern storytelling. She asked if I'd be willing to go on record. Your story's not unique, she said. But your response is. I hesitated. Then I agreed, under a pseudonym. The article came out 2 days later. When personal podcasts cross ethical lines, the cost of turning real lives into narrative fodder. It wasn't a hit piece. It didn't name Elena, but it referenced enough to make it obvious. That article lit the match. Within days, other creators weighed in. Panels discussed it. Even a professor of digital media from New York wrote a piece titled Fictionalizing the Real, a new ethical dilemma in the age of personal branding. Elena became the quiet center of a very loud conversation. Not because she was famous, but because she got caught doing something many others had done in the shadows, turning pain into profit and truth into fiction, without the consent of the people she used as characters. I stayed out of the spotlight. I didn't respond to messages. I didn't gloat. I simply waited. And meanwhile, Elena stopped recording anything. I knew because I checked. Her website was down. Her Instagram, wiped clean. Only a few posts remained, cryptic and vague. One said, "Sometimes the truth gets hijacked by bitter voices." Another, "Silence is safer when the mob comes for blood." But no one believed the mob existed. People just wanted honesty, and she gave them curated fiction instead. One evening, a friend of hers came by the house. Someone I hadn't seen in months. They talked in the kitchen in hushed tones. I stayed upstairs. But as she left, I heard her say, "You could have just told the truth, Elena. You had that option." The door slammed. Elena sat on the couch for hours after that, staring into space. When I finally came down to grab a glass of water, she looked up at me and said, "Do you hate me?" I shook my head. "I don't hate you," I replied, "but I don't trust you. And I don't think I ever will again." That was the last conversation we had for 3 days. By the weekend, she packed a suitcase. Said she needed space. I didn't ask where she was going. I didn't care. She left the house the same way she'd left the truth, without explanation, without apology, without grace. Elena sat in the living room long after the last guest post disappeared and the interview offers dried up. The glow that once surrounded her as a podcast host, an authentic voice for modern women, had dimmed into an uneasy quiet. Her laptop sat unopened for days. Her phone buzzed less. No more group chats. No more collaboration emails. She barely spoke at dinner. Sometimes she would glance at me across the table, but the words never came. That silence didn't bother me. I had made my peace with it. What bothered me was how easily she had turned our life into material and expected I'd never notice. I never intended to destroy her career. At first, I just wanted truth, clarity. But the more I listened to her podcast, the more I realized she wasn't just painting herself as some misunderstood soul trapped in a loveless marriage. She was building a brand on my back, on my character, on our history. She had manipulated the audience's sympathy with curated suffering, and I was the shadow she cast as the villain. And still, I didn't attack her. I didn't publish screenshots. I didn't leak private messages. All I did was speak calmly, state facts, show receipts. And people, real people, listened. A literary blog followed up on the original media ethics article. This time, they dug deeper. They did some polite journalism, connecting her podcast stories to public records, our neighborhood, our family structure, and details about my job and background that she'd masked poorly. It didn't take much for readers to guess who she was talking about and who she was hiding behind a veil of victimhood. That week, 2 more sponsors pulled out. Her Patreon plummeted. The YouTube version of her podcast got mass flagged and demonetized. Reddit threads dissected every fabricated detail she had ever shared, and commenters began comparing her to other influencers who used fiction as a shield. The worst part? She still didn't apologize. One night, about a month into the fallout, I found her sitting on the porch with a glass of wine. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "I just wanted to tell a story," she said. "One that meant something, that helped people." "By rewriting ours?" I asked. She didn't answer, just took another sip. "Elena," I said quietly, "you could have written anything. Fiction, memoir, even satire. But you didn't just use your life, you used mine. You used me, and then you lied about who I was." She blinked hard. "You think I meant to hurt you? I think you didn't care if you did." That hit her. She turned away. The next day, she packed a few bags and went to stay with a friend. She said she needed space. I didn't ask when she'd be back. Truthfully, I didn't expect her to return. And she didn't. Weeks passed. Then months. I heard things here and there. That she tried to rebrand. New accounts, new usernames. She launched a Substack under a pseudonym. But someone always recognized the voice. The style. The recycled metaphors. The tone of self-righteous grief. And every time she tried to restart, someone brought up the podcast scandal. The lost trust. The half-truths. Eventually, editors stopped returning her emails. Even the small lit zines stopped responding. She disappeared online, not with a bang, but with a series of unread posts and forgotten links. As for me, I kept living. I didn't start my own podcast again. I didn't monetize anything. I just focused on my work, took long walks, and reconnected with old friends. I even started reading again, something I hadn't done in years. Real books. Whole stories. Ones that didn't twist real people into fictional monsters. People sometimes asked how I could be so calm about it. How I didn't lose my mind or lash out or crumble. But the truth is, I had already lost her long before the podcast. She just recorded the final chapters before I got to write my own ending. One quiet Sunday morning, almost a year after she left, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just her handwriting. Inside was a short note. No apology. No justification. Just, I hope one day you understand that I didn't hate you. I just didn't know how to be honest and still be loved. I folded the note, placed it in a drawer, and closed it. Because I did understand. And that's why I never answered. By the time fall arrived, the silence between us had grown into something permanent. Elena never returned home. Not truly. She left a few belongings behind. Books with bent spines, half-used journals, a cardigan I had once bought her on a whim. But she herself stayed gone. Sometimes I'd get a message from an unknown number or email, just checking on the dog. Or, hope you're well. But I never replied. I didn't need to. After all, she wasn't asking out of love. She was asking out of guilt. I had done nothing to smear her name. I didn't beg our friends to take sides. I didn't post angry rants online. What I did was far more damaging to her kind of persona. I let her speak for herself, and then I simply pointed to the truth. Her voice was her weapon, her platform, her entire identity. But once people started questioning the source, the shape of her stories, and the victims left behind, that voice lost its credibility. And in today's world, once credibility is gone, sympathy follows. One particular moment stood out in the weeks that followed. A journalist reached out to me, not for an expose or revenge piece. She was doing a podcast series on the cost of curated pain and wanted to interview me, not as a victim, but as someone who had been made into a character. I declined. I didn't want to become content, even if it meant reclaiming the narrative. I had seen firsthand what happened when lives became storyboards, and I wanted no part of that cycle. Instead, I started something else. Quietly, privately, I launched a community writing workshop at the local library. No big announcements. Just a flyer, a sign-up sheet, and space for people to tell stories, real ones. I didn't advertise it as therapy, but I noticed how many people showed up with pain behind their pens. Widowers, caretakers, retirees, even 2 teenagers who said they just wanted to write something that didn't feel fake. One of the prompts I gave them was simple. Tell a story where the ending is not revenge, but peace. I never explained why. One evening, after the group had packed up and I was closing down the room, I noticed someone had left a printed email on the table. I recognized the sender address instantly. It was Elena's old pen name. She had tried to submit a short story to an online journal, and someone had forwarded the rejection back to her, accidentally CCing one of her former publishers. The rejection note read, "We appreciate the submission, but the story felt too self-referential, as if written more to exorcise personal guilt than to offer something to the reader." I didn't smile exactly, but I understood something in that moment. Elena had lost what made her powerful, not just her voice, but the illusion that her stories helped others. Once people saw through the fabrication, her words carried the weight of self-interest, not truth. And that, more than anything I could have done, was what silenced her. Weeks passed, then months. Eventually, someone told me she had moved to Portland, was living with a friend, doing freelance editing work for low-tier blogs. No more panels, no more workshops, no more influencer quotes. Her Instagram was inactive. Her podcast accounts deleted. The world had moved on. And so had I. I didn't remarry. I didn't rush into anything. But I found peace in my own rhythm. I started baking again, something I hadn't done in years. Took up woodworking. Went camping solo. Life, it turned out, didn't need a narrator. It just needed space to breathe. One night, I received a letter. Real paper. No stamp. Someone must have slipped it under the door. It was from Elena. Just one page. Neatly written. The handwriting still the same. Tight, elegant, deliberate. I never intended for it to end this way. But you were right to leave. I thought telling stories would make me brave. But all I did was hide inside them. You deserve better. I hope your silence has brought you peace. No apology. Not really. But something close to accountability. A flicker of self-awareness. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. She had already published every lie she could. Now she had to live in their echo. And I got to live in truth. It had been almost a year since I first heard her voice in that podcast. A full year since the moment I realized the woman I loved had turned our life into someone else's story and made me the villain in it. The storm had passed now. There were no more alerts, no new episodes, No trending hashtags about healing or freedom. Elena had faded from public view, not because I destroyed her, but because her truth unraveled on its own. The night I fully let go, I was walking home from the local diner. Friday nights had become my quiet tradition, a meal alone, no screens, no podcasts, just people's chatter and the clink of cutlery. It reminded me that not all stories were staged. Some just happened. On that walk home, I passed a bookstore. There, taped to the window, was a flyer for a writing retreat in the Berkshires. I recognized one of the guest speakers, an old colleague of Elena's. In smaller print, I saw her name. Elena, listed not as a keynote speaker, but as a panel contributor. A far cry from the main stage presence she once was. I stared for a long time. Then I walked away. There was nothing more to say, no final blow to deliver. I had already taken my life back. That was the victory. In the months that followed, something strange happened. I was invited to speak at a local college, not about marriage or betrayal, but about narrative accountability. A professor had read a quiet blog I wrote reflecting on the power of framing and thought it would resonate with students. I almost said no, but then I remembered how powerful it had been for me to reclaim control of my own story, not with rage, not with noise, but with clarity. The students asked thoughtful questions. One of them said, "Is it true that people can write entire books and still not face their truth?" I replied, "Some people write books to avoid their truth. But eventually, the reader always sees what's missing." That line stayed with me. So did the quiet that followed. I didn't seek revenge, but I didn't forgive either. What I did was rebuild. Slowly, in the gaps where the lies used to sit. Elena never made a full comeback. Some say she writes under a different name now. Small blogs, maybe newsletters. But the spotlight doesn't shine twice on a broken mask, especially when the mask was built on someone else's dignity. As for me, I moved out of our old house, sold it, bought a small cabin outside town, with a porch that looks out at nothing but trees. It's quiet there. You can hear your own thoughts again. I still teach writing workshops, still bake, still sleep peacefully. Every now and then, I get asked if I ever miss her, or if I miss what we had. I don't, because what I miss never really existed. It was a script, and I wasn't the co-writer. I was just background, but not anymore. Now, when I wake up, I live a story that's mine. Not curated, not packaged, not broadcasted. Just real. And in the end, that's what mattered most.